My name is Amanda, 34 years old, and I never expected a two-word text would change everything. When my phone lit up with my mother's message, "Don't call or come over, we're done," something inside me finally broke free. After years of walking on eggshells trying to earn love that came with conditions, I simply replied, "Got it." No begging, no apologies, just acceptance. My mother wanted to punish me with her absence, never imagining I would let her walk away. But 4 years later, when crisis hit, she discovered what cutting me out of her life really meant. For both of us. Where are you watching from today? Hit like and subscribe if you've ever had to set boundaries with family who couldn't accept your choices. Because sometimes the most powerful response to rejection is simply walking away with dignity. I grew up in a beautiful colonial-style house in Connecticut, the kind of home that appeared perfect from the outside. Manicured lawn, tasteful decorations that changed with the seasons, and a family that looked like it came straight from a magazine spread. But like many seemingly perfect things, the reality behind closed doors was vastly different. My mother, Diane Mitchell, was the undisputed ruler of our household. A former corporate attorney who gave up her career when I was born, she channeled all her ambition and controlling tendencies into creating the perfect family. My father, Robert, was a successful surgeon who worked long hours and generally deferred to my mother on all family matters, choosing peace over conflict whenever possible. "Your mother knows what's best," he would say when I appealed to him for support. "She just wants you to succeed." Success in my mother's definition was narrowly defined. Perfect grades, appropriate extracurricular activities, the right friends from the right families, and above all, absolute compliance with her vision for my life. From the clothes I wore to the colleges I applied to, every decision was scrutinized and often overruled. "Amanda, do you really think that's the best choice?" became the phrase I dreaded most. It was never actually a question, but a preamble to her explaining why my preferences were wrong. My younger brother Tyler had an easier time. 3 years my junior, he seemed to naturally align with my mother's expectations. He was methodical where I was creative, practical where I was idealistic, and most importantly, compliant, where I questioned. By the time he was in high school, he had already committed to following my father into medicine, earning my mother's fervent approval. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" became another common refrain in our household, particularly after I announced my intention to study art in college, rather than pursue the law career my mother had mapped out for me. The battle over my college choice was the first time I truly stood up to her. After years of suppressing my own desires to keep the peace, something inside me refused to give up this dream. I had already spent 18 years trying to earn my mother's love through achievement, perfect grades, student government, community service that looked good on applications, all while secretly sketching and painting whenever I could find time alone. "Art is a hobby, not a career," my mother declared when I showed her my portfolio and scholarship offers. "We didn't raise you to waste your potential." But I held firm even when she threatened to withhold financial support. My father, in a rare moment of intervention, agreed to help with my tuition, though he couched it as allowing me time to get this phase out of my system before law school. College became my first taste of freedom. Being 3 states away from my mother's daily scrutiny allowed me to breathe, to explore who I was without constant judgment. My art flourished, and so did I. I made friends who appreciated me for myself, not for the achievements my mother could brag about at her social gatherings. It was during my junior year that I met James. He was a graduate student in architecture, and we connected immediately over our shared love of visual expression and design. Unlike anyone I dated before, all carefully mother-approved young men from good families, James came from a working-class background and had put himself through school with scholarships and part-time jobs. "Your mother sounds like a piece of work," he commented after I explained why I couldn't go home with him for Thanksgiving, afraid of my mother's reaction to missing the holiday. "She just has high standards." I defended automatically, then caught myself. "Actually, no. She's controlling and nothing I do is ever enough." That moment of honesty was transformative. For the first time, I had acknowledged out loud what I'd always known but never admitted, that my mother's love was conditional on my compliance, and that no achievement would ever be enough to secure her approval. With James's support and my growing confidence, I began setting small boundaries during my remaining time in college. I didn't come home for every holiday. I didn't call every day as expected. I made decisions without consulting her first. Each tiny act of independence was met with emotional manipulation, guilt trips, cold shoulders, tearful accusations of abandonment. But I held firm. After graduation, despite my mother's persistent pressure to return home and apply to law schools, I moved to Boston, where James was establishing his career with an architectural firm. I found work with a small gallery while building my portfolio, living in a tiny apartment that my mother described as barely fit for human habitation during her one disapproving visit. "When are you going to grow up and get a real job?" she asked, surveying my paintings with thinly veiled contempt. "This isn't sustainable, Amanda." What she failed to understand was that I was happier in that tiny apartment pursuing work I loved than I had ever been in her immaculate house following her approved life script. For the first time, I was building a life based on my own values, rather than desperately trying to earn love through compliance. Christmas that year marked another turning point. After intense pressure, I agreed to come home for the holiday, only to endure 3 days of passive-aggressive comments about my career, my apartment, and especially James, whom my mother had decided was holding me back from my potential. "He clearly doesn't come from the kind of background we'd hoped for you," she remarked during Christmas dinner after questioning him extensively about his family. When I defended him, pointing out his talent and work ethic, she shifted tactics. "I just worry that you're settling, Amanda. You always did struggle with confidence." That night, as James and I lay in my childhood bedroom, separate rooms having been insisted upon, despite us living together in Boston, I made a decision. "Next Christmas, we're staying in Boston," I whispered. "I can't keep doing this." James squeezed my hand in the darkness. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." The freedom of that decision, of prioritizing my well-being over my mother's expectations, was exhilarating and terrifying. I was simultaneously releasing myself from her approval and accepting that I might never receive it. But the peace I found in the months that followed, as I established firmer boundaries and focused on building my life with James, confirmed I had made the right choice. My mother predictably didn't accept these boundaries gracefully. Phone calls became minefields of guilt and recrimination. Visits home were so stressful that I began limiting them to 1 or 2 days maximum. My father remained largely sidelined, occasionally reaching out independently with awkward but well-meaning calls that carefully avoided mentioning any family tension. Tyler, now in medical school and firmly entrenched as the good child, became my mother's unwitting weapon. "Mom's just worried about you," he would say during our increasingly rare conversations. "She doesn't understand why you're pushing everyone away." The narrative had been established I was the problem. My independence was reframed as rejection, my boundaries as selfishness. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't buying into that narrative, wasn't desperately trying to prove myself worthy of approval. And that shift in perspective would soon bring everything to a breaking point. The catalyst came 2 years after college graduation, when James proposed during a weekend trip to Cape Cod. The vintage emerald ring, chosen because he knew I'd prefer something unique over a traditional diamond, symbolized everything about our relationship that worked. He saw me, the real me, and loved me for exactly who I was. My first call with the news was to my best friend Mia, who squealed with appropriate enthusiasm and immediately demanded details. My second call, made with far more trepidation, was to my parents. My father offered genuine, if reserved, congratulations. My mother's response was immediate and predictable. "Engaged already. Don't you think you should establish your career first?" When I explained that we were planning a relatively long engagement of about 18 months, she pivoted smoothly. "Well, I suppose that gives us time to plan properly. I'll call the club tomorrow about available dates. June is traditional, of course, but they book up quickly." "Mom," I interrupted, "we haven't decided on any details yet, and when we do, it will be our decision." The silence on the other end of the line was ominous. "Amanda, this isn't just about you. A wedding reflects on the entire family. Your father and I will be hosting, and we have certain obligations to consider." And just like that, the pattern reasserted itself. My milestone had been immediately co-opted as her project, my choices subordinated to her vision. Actually, I said carefully, James and I are considering a smaller wedding, possibly even a destination ceremony with just close friends and family. Don't be ridiculous, she dismissed. What would people think your father's colleagues, my friends from the foundation, and the family, of course? Your grandmother would never travel that far at her age. The conversation devolved from there, ending with her declaring that we would discuss this reasonably when I was ready to be practical. I hung up feeling that familiar knot of anxiety that had characterized most of my interactions with her throughout my life. James found me curled on the couch, the excitement of our engagement overshadowed by the anticipated battle ahead. We could elope, he suggested, half seriously stroking my hair. She'd never forgive me, I sighed. Would that be so terrible? He asked gently. His question lingered with me in the weeks that followed as my mother launched into full wedding planning mode despite my protests. Venue suggestions, florist recommendations, and guest list spreadsheets arrived by email daily. When I didn't respond quickly enough, phone calls followed. I've put a deposit down at the club for next June, she announced about a month after our engagement. It's refundable for the next 2 weeks, but after that we're committed. Mom, I told you we haven't decided on a date or venue yet, I protested. Well, you need to decide quickly. Good venues don't wait around, Amanda. And June at the club is perfect. Your father and I were married there after all. The implied emotional blackmail was clear. Rejecting her choice meant rejecting family tradition, rejecting her. Once that would have been enough to make me capitulate. But James and I had already discussed what we wanted. A fall wedding at a rustic venue near Boston where many of our friends lived. We're actually thinking about October, I said, at Lakeside Farm in the Berkshires. The explosion was immediate. How could I be so selfish? Didn't I care about family tradition? What about guests who would have to travel? What about her friends who had watched me grow up? On, the objections went until finally, if you insist on this ridiculous plan, you can pay for it yourselves. And don't expect much help from the family either. It was meant to be the ultimate threat, financial abandonment. Once it would have worked. But James and I had already decided to fund the wedding ourselves precisely to avoid this very leverage. We've budgeted for that, I replied calmly. This is our wedding, Mom. We're going to have it our way. The months that followed were a cold war of passive-aggressive texts, tearful phone calls, and increasingly desperate attempts to regain control. My mother tried every tactic in her arsenal. Health concerns, your grandmother might not be well enough to travel by then. Financial pressure. We were planning to contribute significantly, but if you insist on this venue. And finally, straight guilt. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. James witnessed it all with growing concern, offering support, but never pushing me to cut ties completely. Whatever you decide, I'm with you, became his mantra, a stark contrast to the conditional support I'd grown up with. The final breaking point came when we sent out save-the-date cards for our October wedding. My mother called immediately. I noticed my cousins from Phoenix aren't on your list, she began without preamble. We're keeping it relatively small, Mom, about 80 people total. That's absurd. Your father and I have at least that many we need to invite. I've already mentioned the date to several friends who are expecting invitations. We decided on our guest list together, I explained. We're inviting people who are actually part of our lives, not social obligations. So my family and friends aren't important enough for your special day, after all I've done for you. The conversation escalated from there, with my mother eventually declaring that if certain people weren't invited, she and my father wouldn't attend either. It was the ultimate gambit. Surely I wouldn't risk having no parents at my wedding. I hope you'll reconsider, I said finally. We want you there, but this is our wedding, not a social networking event. You've changed, Amanda, she said coldly. This isn't how we raised you to be. That boy has turned you against your family. His name is James, Mom. We've been together for 3 years, and he hasn't turned me against anyone. He's just the first person who supported me in being myself. The conversation ended with her hanging up. I expected the usual pattern to follow. A few days of cold silence, then a resumption of contact with the conflict unresolved, but temporarily shelved. Instead, the next morning my phone pinged with a text message. I can't watch you make these mistakes. Don't call or come over. We're done. I stared at the screen, a strange calm washing over me. This was the ultimate manipulation tactic, the complete withdrawal of love and connection unless I complied. It was meant to bring me to my knees, to have me begging for forgiveness and promising to do things her way. Instead, I typed 2 words that would change everything. Got it. Then I put down my phone and went to work on a new painting, feeling lighter than I had in years. The weeks following my mother's dramatic text brought an unexpected sense of peace. The constant anxiety of navigating her expectations, the dread before every phone call, the mental gymnastics of trying to predict what might trigger her disapproval, all of it disappeared overnight. It was as if I'd been carrying a heavy backpack for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. "Are you okay?" James asked repeatedly during those first few days, clearly concerned about my calm acceptance. "Honestly, I feel relieved," I admitted. "I think part of me has been waiting for this for years, for her to finally make me choose between her approval and my own life. Now that she has the decision is surprisingly easy." That's not to say there wasn't pain. 30 years of conditioning doesn't disappear overnight. There were moments of doubt, of grief for the mother-daughter relationship I'd never had, and now likely never would. But those moments were balanced by a growing sense of liberation. Our wedding planning continued without the constant barrage of maternal criticism. We chose flowers, we liked food, we enjoyed music that meant something to us. Friends stepped up to help with details, turning what could have been a stressful process into a joyful collaboration. My father remained a complicated figure in the equation. He called once about 2 weeks after my mother's text, his discomfort evident even through the phone. "Your mother is very upset," he began awkwardly. "I imagine she is," I replied. "She usually is when she doesn't get her way." "Amanda," he sighed, "can't you just compromise on a few things? Add some names to the guest list? It would mean so much to her." "Dad, this isn't actually about the guest list. It's about Mom needing to control every aspect of my life, and me finally saying no. If I give in now, nothing will change. Ever." There was a long pause. "I just want peace in the family." "So do I, Dad. But not at the cost of my own happiness anymore. You've always chosen peace over conflict by giving in to Mom. I'm making a different choice." He didn't have an answer for that. After some awkward small talk, he ended the call with a vague, "We'll talk soon," that we both knew might not happen. Tyler's reaction was less measured. He called the day after my mother's text, clearly having been given a version of events that cast me as the villain. "How could you do this to Mom?" he demanded. "She's been crying for hours." "What exactly did she tell you I did?" I asked. His hesitation told me everything. "She said you've chosen your fiancé over your family, that you've banned family members from your wedding and don't care about hurting her." "None of that is true, Tyler. We limited our guest list to people who are actually part of our lives. Mom decided that if she couldn't invite everyone she wanted for appearance's sake, she wouldn't come at all. Then she told me not to contact her anymore." "But surely you can compromise a little," he pressed, echoing my father. "Just add a few names to keep the peace." "I've been keeping the peace my entire life, Tyler. Look where it's gotten me. A mother who withdraws love the moment I make my own choices. I'm done compromising my happiness to manage her emotions." The conversation ended poorly with Tyler declaring I was being selfish and unreasonable. I wasn't surprised. He'd always been the good child, the one who followed the script. My deviation threatened the system that gave him his place in the family. As weeks turned to months, the silence from my family remained unbroken. No birthday card in July. No calls to check in. My mother had apparently committed fully to her declaration that we were done, and my father and brother had fallen in line as they always did. Well-meaning friends occasionally suggested reconciliation. "Family is family," they would say. "You only get one mother." But as I explained to Mia over coffee one day, having a mother who only loves you when you do exactly what she wants isn't actually better than having no mother at all. It's just a different kind of pain. Our wedding day in October was everything we had hoped for. Intimate, joyful, and authentically us. James's family welcomed me warmly, his mother Joyce hugging me with tears in her eyes before the ceremony. "I want you to know," she whispered, "that you're not just gaining a husband today. You're gaining a family who loves you exactly as you are." I had invited my parents and Tyler, sending formal invitations despite my mother's text. The RSVP cards came back marked regrets with no personal note. Their absence was noted by a few guests, but most people were too caught up in the celebration to dwell on it. During the reception, as James and I swayed to our first dance, I realized that for the first time in my life, I was completely present in a moment of joy, not worried about meeting someone else's expectations or earning approval. I was loved, I was free, and I was finally authentically myself. The first year of marriage brought its own challenges and joys, but the freedom from my mother's constant criticism allowed me to focus on building our life together without second-guessing every decision. My art career began to gain traction with a few pieces selling through local galleries and a growing list of commission requests. Holidays, once minefields of family tension, became opportunities to create our own traditions. For Thanksgiving, we hosted a family of choice gathering with friends. For Christmas, we visited James's family in Ohio, where I was treated as a beloved daughter rather than a perpetual disappointment. Through mutual friends and distant relatives, I occasionally heard news of my family. My mother had apparently told everyone who would listen that I had abandoned the family for my controlling husband. A projection so obvious, it would have been funny if it weren't so painful. My father continued his surgical practice, but had aged noticeably, according to my mother's cousin who ran into me at a gallery opening. Tyler had graduated medical school and begun his residency. His path still firmly aligned with my parents' expectations. I sent Christmas cards that first year, including brief notes about our lives. They weren't returned, but neither were they acknowledged. It was as if they had been dropped into a void, which in many ways they had been. My mother had created a narrative where I was the villain, and acknowledging any contact from me would have disrupted that story. As our first anniversary approached, I realized that the grief I had expected to feel had transformed into something else. A calm acceptance that the relationship with my mother might never be what I had hoped for, but that I could build a fulfilling life nonetheless. The price of admission to my mother's love had always been my autonomy. I was no longer willing to pay it. Life has a way of moving forward even when significant pieces of your past remain unresolved. 2 years after my mother's text declaring we were done, James and I had settled into a rhythm that felt both grounding and expansive. His architectural career was flourishing with a promotion to project manager at his firm. My artwork had found enough of an audience that I had transitioned from part-time gallery work to full-time painting with a growing list of commissions and my first solo exhibition scheduled for the fall. We had purchased a modest but charming Victorian home in a developing neighborhood, where James could exercise his renovation skills, and I had converted the third-floor attic into a light-filled studio. The house was everything my mother would have disapproved of, old, in need of updates in a transitional area rather than an established suburb, which made it feel all the more perfectly ours. "Can you imagine what your mom would say about these floors?" James joked one weekend as we sanded the original hardwood in the dining room, covered for decades by worn carpet. "She'd have ripped them out and installed something beige and inoffensive from a catalog," I replied, surprised to find I could now occasionally joke about her without the immediate sting of hurt. The most significant development, however, came in early spring when 2 lines appeared on a pregnancy test. The mix of emotions was overwhelming: joy, terror, excitement, and a renewed sense of loss. Becoming a mother myself brought my own mother's absence into sharper relief. I keep thinking about what kind of mother I want to be. I confessed to James one night, curled against him with his hand resting protectively over my still flat stomach. And it's basically the opposite of everything my mother was. "You're going to be amazing," he assured me. "You know exactly what not to do." Despite our estrangement, I felt an obligation to inform my parents about their impending grandchild. After much consideration, I sent a simple announcement card with a copy of the sonogram and a note saying they were welcome to be part of the baby's life if they wished. I deliberately used the word welcome rather than the more emotionally loaded want or hope, placing the ball firmly in their court without begging or expectation. Months passed with no response. My pregnancy progressed normally, our excitement growing as we prepared the small second bedroom as a nursery. James painted a mural of woodland creatures on one wall, while I created a series of small canvases with uplifting messages about courage, kindness, and authenticity, the values we hope to instill in our child. My due date approached with no word from my parents. I had reached out once more with updated contact information and the name of the hospital again, with no expectation, but wanting to leave the door open. Tyler had sent a brief congratulatory text, the first contact in nearly 2 years, but made no mention of our parents or any plans to visit when the baby arrived. Lily Rose Harrison was born on a Tuesday morning in September after 14 hours of labor. She had James's dark curls and my green eyes' tiny, perfect fingers, and a determined expression that the labor nurse laughingly said reminded her of me during delivery. The love that washed over me when they placed her on my chest was unlike anything I had ever experienced, fierce, protective, and completely unconditional. "I will never make you earn my love," I whispered to her as she slept in my arms that first night. "Not ever." We brought Lily home to a house filled with flowers and gifts from friends and James's family. His parents had driven in from Ohio and stayed for 2 weeks helping with meals, laundry, and night feedings so we could adjust to parenthood with support. Joyce, my mother-in-law, was everything I had wished for in a mother. Supportive without being intrusive, offering advice only when asked, and treating me with the same love she showed her son. "You're doing beautifully," she assured me one afternoon when I broke down in exhausted tears after Lily had been fussing for hours. "New motherhood is hard for everyone. Be gentle with yourself." The contrast with my own upbringing, where mistakes were cataloged and weaknesses exploited, couldn't have been more stark. 3 weeks after Lily's birth, an unmarked package arrived at our door. Inside was a silver baby rattle, expensive but impersonal, with no card. The return address belonged to my father's office. It was a gesture, albeit a minimal one, and I found myself unexpectedly moved by it. Later that day, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Congratulations on your daughter. She's beautiful. Dad." He had created a separate phone number to contact me, presumably without my mother's knowledge. I replied with a simple thank you, and a recent photo of Lily not asking questions or pushing for more than he was ready to give. It was a thread, however thin, and I was willing to see where it might lead. As Lily grew from newborn to infant, I occasionally posted photos on social media, knowing through mutual connections that Tyler sometimes viewed them. Around Lily's 6-month birthday, I received another text from him. "She looks like you did as a baby. Mom doesn't know I'm texting. Can I visit sometime alone?" The request surprised me. Tyler had been so firmly in my mother's camp that I hadn't expected him to reach out independently. We arranged for him to visit on a weekend when he had a conference in Boston, ostensibly keeping his true destination from our parents. The reunion was awkward at first. Tyler, now a second-year resident in orthopedic surgery, looked older and more tired than I remembered. He held Lily stiffly, clearly unpracticed with babies, but his expression as she grabbed his finger was one of genuine wonder. "She's amazing, Amanda," he said. "I can't believe I'm an uncle." Over dinner, while James entertained Lily in the living room, Tyler and I had our first honest conversation in years. "Mom still refuses to acknowledge you have a baby," he admitted. "When Dad got that photo from somewhere and made the mistake of showing her, she went completely cold. Said if you wanted her to know your child, you wouldn't have excluded her from your life." "That's not what happened, Tyler. She excluded me. Remember, 'Don't call or come over, we're done,' her exact words." He nodded slowly. "I know. I didn't really understand then, but I've been doing some thinking. Seeing how she's been since you left, it's like she needs to control everything and everyone, and when she can't, she just cuts them off." It was the first time anyone from my family had acknowledged my mother's controlling behavior. "That's exactly it, Tyler. And I couldn't live that way anymore. Not if I wanted any chance at happiness." "I get that now," he said quietly. "Sometimes I wonder if I made the wrong choice following exactly the path they laid out. Don't get me wrong. I like medicine. But there are other specialties I might have preferred over orthopedics if I hadn't been so focused on making them proud." The admission created a bridge between us that I hadn't thought possible. Before he left, he hugged me tightly and promised to stay in touch this time, not in secret. Dad asks about you, he added at the door. Not in front of Mom, but he does ask. I think he regrets not standing up for you more. He made his choice, I replied, not unkindly. We all did. As Lily's first birthday approached, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in the 4 years since my mother's text. I had lost my family of origin, but gained a family of choice. I had established a career doing what I loved rather than what was expected. Most importantly, I had broken the cycle of conditional love and controlling behavior that had defined my childhood, creating for Lily the secure, loving environment I had always craved. The peace I had found wasn't about forgetting or pretending the hurt hadn't happened. It was about accepting that I couldn't change others, only how I responded to them. My mother had intended her rejection to break me, to force me back into compliance. Instead, it had freed me to become fully myself. What she never understood, what she would learn only when circumstances forced her hand, was that walking away from toxic love is sometimes the only path to finding real love, both for others and for yourself. The call came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in April, just a few months after Lily's first birthday. I was in my studio working on a commission, while Lily napped in the portable crib I'd set up in the corner, when my phone lit up with Tyler's name. Dad had a heart attack, he said without preamble, his voice tight with controlled emotion. It's serious, Amanda. They've taken him to Hartford Hospital. He's stable for now, but they're talking about bypass surgery. The news hit me like a physical blow. Despite our estrangement, I had never stopped loving my father. His passive enabling of my mother had been frustrating, but I understood the complex dynamics that had trapped him in that role for decades. I'll be there as soon as I can, I said immediately. Does Mom know you're calling me? No, Tyler admitted. But Amanda, I think you should come anyway. This is Dad we're talking about. After arranging for a friend to watch Lily, I made the 2-hour drive to Hartford in tense silence, mentally preparing for the confrontation that would inevitably occur when I arrived. James had offered to come with me, but I declined. This was something I needed to face alone. The cardiac care unit was quiet and dimly lit when I arrived. Tyler met me in the waiting area, his scrubs wrinkled from a full day at his own hospital before rushing to Hartford. How is he? I asked, hugging my brother briefly. Stable but critical. They're prepping him for surgery tomorrow morning. Triple bypass. He looked exhausted, the professional medical demeanor slipping to reveal the worried son beneath. Mom's with him now. I should warn you, she's not in a good place. I understand, but I'm here for Dad, not to continue old arguments. Tyler nodded gratefully. His room is just down the hall, number 412. I approached slowly, my heart pounding with anxiety, not about my father's condition, but about facing my mother after 4 years of complete silence. Through the partially open door, I could see her sitting beside the bed, her back to the entrance. My father lay still, connected to monitors and IV lines, looking smaller and frailer than I remembered. Taking a deep breath, I knocked gently on the doorframe. My mother turned, her expression shifting from expectant to frozen in the span of a heartbeat. What are you doing here? She demanded, her voice low but sharp. Tyler called me, I replied calmly. I came to see Dad. After 4 years of nothing, now you decide to show up. I bit back the automatic defensive response, that she had been the one to cut contact, not me. This wasn't the time or place. I'd like to see him, please, I said instead, keeping my voice even. My mother stood, physically positioning herself between me and the bed. He doesn't need the stress of family drama right now. I'm not here to create drama. I'm here because my father is seriously ill and I love him. Before she could respond, a weak voice came from the bed. Diane, let her in. My mother's shoulders stiffened, but she stepped aside reluctantly. I moved to the opposite side of the bed from her, taking my father's hand gently in mine. His fingers were cool and papery, his complexion alarmingly gray beneath the fluorescent lights. Hi, Dad, I said softly. Amanda? He murmured, a small smile lifting the corner of his mouth. You came. Of course I did. He squeezed my hand weakly. Good, that's good. My mother remained rigid, her arms crossed defensively across her chest. Robert needs to rest. The doctor said minimal excitement before surgery. I'm not excited, Diane. My father sighed. I'm seeing my daughter. Her mouth tightened, but she said nothing more, resuming her seat with pointed displeasure. We sat in uncomfortable silence for several minutes, the only sounds the steady beep of the heart monitor and my father's slightly labored breathing. A nurse entered, breaking the tension, as she checked vital signs and adjusted medication. Are you family? She asked me with a professional smile. This is our daughter, my father answered before either my mother or I could speak. Amanda, the nurse nodded, making a note on her tablet. I'll need to update our contact list then. We like to have all immediate family members' information for updates during and after surgery. That won't be necessary, my mother interjected quickly. I'm his wife. I'll be the contact person. The nurse looked between us, clearly sensing the tension. It's standard procedure to have multiple contacts, Mrs. Mitchell, especially for a serious procedure like this. I provided my information quietly, ignoring my mother's glare. When the nurse left, my father closed his eyes wearily. You two are going to have to find a way to be civil. I don't have the energy for this right now. Guilt washed over me at adding stress to his already precarious condition. I'm sorry, Dad. Mom's right, you should rest. I'll come back in the morning before your surgery. I leaned down to kiss his forehead, whispered that I loved him, and left the room without looking at my mother again. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted by the emotional toll of the brief encounter. Tyler found me there a few minutes later. That bad, huh? About what I expected, I admitted. She doesn't want me here. Too bad, he replied with uncharacteristic firmness. Dad does, and right now that's what matters. We went to the cafeteria for coffee, discussing the medical details of our father's condition. Tyler explained the surgical procedure, the recovery process, and the significant care our father would need afterward. Mom's completely overwhelmed, he confided. She's been handling all of Dad's appointments and medications for his blood pressure, but this is different. He's going to need serious support during recovery. Is there a plan for after he's discharged? I asked. Tyler shook his head. Not really. Mom keeps insisting she can handle everything, but honestly, I don't see how. Their house has 2 stories, and he won't be able to manage stairs for a while. She doesn't drive at night anymore because of her vision, and I'm in the middle of my residency. I can visit on weekends, but I can't be there daily. The implied question hung between us, unspoken but clear. Despite everything, despite 4 years of silence and hurt, my medical training and more flexible work schedule made me the logical person to help with our father's recovery. But could I do it? Could I re-enter their lives after the way I'd been pushed out? Let's get through the surgery first. I suggested avoiding a commitment either way. One step at a time. The following morning, I arrived at the hospital early, hoping to see my father before he was taken to surgery. I found my mother alone in his room, my father having already been moved to pre-op. They took him about 20 minutes ago, she said stiffly when I entered. The surgeon wanted to start earlier than planned. I nodded, disappointed, but not surprised. How was he this morning? Nervous, but resolute. She fidgeted with her wedding ring, twisting it around her finger. The doctor says the surgery should take about 6 hours. They'll send updates to the waiting room. It was the longest, most civil exchange we'd had in years, born of shared concern rather than any real reconciliation. We made our way to the surgical waiting area in awkward silence, finding seats on opposite sides of the room. Tyler arrived shortly after, looking between us with a sigh, before taking a diplomatic middle position. The hours crawled by. Periodic updates came from the surgical liaison. The bypass was proceeding as expected, vital signs remained stable, everything going according to plan. My mother maintained her distance, speaking only to Tyler when necessary. I busied myself with checking in with James about Lily and responding to work emails, anything to fill the tense silence. Finally, around 3 in the afternoon, the surgeon appeared in scrubs, his face tired but satisfied. The surgery went very well, he announced. We completed the triple bypass without complications. Mr. Mitchell is in recovery now and should be moved to the ICU within the hour. The collective relief was palpable. My mother visibly sagged the rigid posture she'd maintained all day, finally giving way to exhaustion. Tyler stepped in with medical questions that I understood but suspected were beyond my mother's comprehension. "When can we see him?" she asked finally. "One visitor at a time in the ICU for just a few minutes each hour," the surgeon replied. "He'll be quite groggy from the anesthesia. By tomorrow, if all goes well, we'll move him to a regular room where he can have more visitors." As the first-degree relative, my mother went in to see him first, leaving Tyler and me in the waiting area. "He's going to need a lot of help," Tyler said after she'd gone. "At least 6 weeks of serious restrictions, probably longer given his age." "I know," I replied. "I've been thinking about it. Mom can't manage it alone, Amanda. You know that. She's too proud to admit it, but she can't." I sighed, acknowledging the truth of his assessment. "What exactly are you asking me to do, Tyler?" "Help, however you can." He looked at me directly. "I know she hurt you. I know it's complicated. But this isn't about her or even about you. It's about Dad." The conversation was interrupted by my mother's return. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her expression strained. "He's asking for you," she said to me, the admission clearly difficult for her. My father was barely conscious when I entered the ICU, his eyes fluttering open briefly as I approached. "Amanda," he murmured, "you stayed." "Of course I did." I took his hand carefully, mindful of the IV lines. "The surgery went really well, Dad. You're going to be fine." "Your mother," he began, his voice weak. "She'll need help." "Don't worry about that now," I soothed. "Just focus on recovering." "Promise me," he insisted, surprising me with his lucidity despite the medication. "Promise you'll help her. She won't ask." I hesitated, the weight of what he was asking settling heavily on my shoulders. It wasn't just about practical assistance during his recovery. It was about reopening the door to a relationship that had caused me so much pain. It was about facing my mother's pride and hostility on a daily basis, potentially for weeks. But looking at my father's pale face, the tubes and monitors surrounding him, I couldn't refuse. "I promised Dad. I'll help however I can." His eyes closed, satisfied with my answer. "Good girl," he murmured, already drifting back to sleep. As I left the ICU, I knew I had committed to something that would fundamentally change the fragile peace I had established in my life. I would need to leave my home, my husband, my daughter, my work, at least temporarily, to fulfill this promise. I would need to re-enter the dynamic I had escaped, but hopefully with enough strength and boundary setting to avoid being consumed by it again. And my mother, proud and controlling as ever, would have to accept help from the daughter she had declared herself done with 4 years ago. She would have to face in the most practical terms exactly what walking away really meant, not just for me, but for her. Because now, when she needed support most desperately, the daughter she had rejected was the one she would have to turn to. As I prepared to share my decision with Tyler, I felt an unexpected sense of calm. This wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was about showing up with integrity, about being the person I wanted to be, rather than reacting to who my mother was. And perhaps in the process, we might all learn something about what family could mean when it wasn't used as a weapon or a chain. The week following my father's surgery became a crash course in navigating complicated family dynamics during crisis. As he stabilized in the ICU, then transferred to a regular room, the question of his post-hospital care became increasingly urgent. "The social worker wants to meet with family this afternoon," the charge nurse informed us on the third day. "They need to discuss discharge planning." My mother immediately stiffened. "I'm his wife. I'll handle the meeting." "They recommend all involved family members attend," the nurse replied diplomatically, "since there will be significant care needs after discharge." The meeting revealed exactly what Tyler had predicted. My father would need constant supervision for the first 2 weeks, help with everything from medication management to bathing. He couldn't climb stairs, lift anything heavier than 5 pounds, or drive. The recovery would be measured in months, not weeks. The hospital social worker looked between my mother and me as she outlined these requirements. "Do you have a plan for how to manage this level of care?" "I'll take care of my husband," my mother stated firmly, though her expression betrayed uncertainty. "Mrs. Mitchell, this will be a full-time job," the social worker explained gently. Will you have help? Before my mother could answer, I spoke up. I'll be staying with them for at least the first few weeks. I'm a trained artist, but I worked as a nurse's aide during college, so I have some relevant experience. The surprise on my mother's face would have been comical under different circumstances. The social worker nodded approvingly, making notes in her file. That's excellent, and you are… Their daughter, I supplied. Amanda Harrison. Perfect. We can schedule the discharge for Friday then, assuming all continues to go well. After the social worker left, my mother turned to me in the hallway outside my father's room. What do you think you're doing? Helping Dad, I replied simply. Like he asked me to. We don't need your help. I can manage. Mom, I said as gently as I could. You can't. Not alone. The house has stairs. Dad weighs almost twice what you do. You don't drive at night. These are just practical realities. So now you swoop in after 4 years to save the day. The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable, playing the hero while making me look incompetent. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that her anger came from fear and pride, not true animosity. This isn't about you or me. It's about what Dad needs right now. Can we please set aside everything else and focus on that? She didn't respond directly, but her silence was as close to acquiescence as I was likely to get. We returned to my father's room separately, the tenuous truce established, but fragile. That evening, I called James to explain the situation. His support was immediate and unwavering. How long do you think you'll need to stay? He asked after I'd outlined the plan. At least 2 weeks, possibly longer. I can come home on weekends, maybe. I sighed, already missing him and Lily desperately. I'm sorry to do this to you. You're not doing anything to me, he corrected gently. You're helping your father when he needs you. That's who you are, Amanda. Someone who shows up when it matters. It's one of the reasons I love you. His understanding made my throat tight with emotion. I love you too. Kiss Lily for me. Every day, he promised. And we'll FaceTime so she doesn't forget her mama. The logistics came together quickly. I arranged for my current commissions to be delayed, explaining the family emergency to clients who were largely understanding. James would bring some clothes and essentials when he drove me to my parents' house on Friday. My mother, meanwhile, maintained a cool distance, acknowledging the arrangement without explicitly accepting it. My father's response when I told him the plan was the opposite of my mother's. Thank you, he said, genuine relief washing over his features. I've been worried about your mother trying to manage alone. It won't be easy, I warned him. Things between Mom and me are still complicated. I know, he acknowledged, but you're both stubborn as hell. You'll figure it out. Friday arrived with surprising speed. My father was discharged with a list of medications, restrictions, and follow-up appointments that filled several pages. James drove me directly to my parents' house, where we found my mother frantically preparing the downstairs guest room that would serve as my father's temporary bedroom. Let me help, I offered, setting down my suitcase. I know where everything goes, she replied dismissively. James squeezed my hand supportively before retrieving the rest of my things from the car. My mother watched him with barely concealed suspicion, as if expecting him to damage something or overstay his welcome. I appreciate you bringing Amanda, she said stiffly when he returned. Of course, he replied with the easy warmth that characterized his interactions with everyone. We want to help however we can. Well, Amanda will be enough, she said, effectively dismissing him. To his credit, James didn't react to the rudeness. He simply kissed me goodbye, promised to call that evening, and left with a final reassurance that he and Lily would be fine. The ambulance arrived shortly after with my father, who was settled into the makeshift bedroom with the help of the EMTs. He looked exhausted from the short journey, his face pale and drawn with pain despite the medication. Just need to rest a bit, he murmured as I adjusted his pillows. Sleep as long as you need, I told him. We've got everything under control. The first few days established a rhythm of sorts. I managed my father's medications, helped him with exercises prescribed by the physical therapist, and assisted with basic needs like bathing and dressing. My mother hovered constantly, simultaneously critical of my methods, and clearly relieved not to bear the full burden alone. He prefers the blue pajamas, she would say, or That's not how the nurse showed us to change the dressing. I bit my tongue repeatedly, reminding myself that this was her home, her husband, her normal life disrupted. My presence, however necessary, was an implicit challenge to her role as caregiver and decision maker. The nights were hardest. My father often needed help during the night, and I insisted on taking the overnight shifts, since my mother at 68 needed proper rest herself. This arrangement meant I was sleeping on the living room sofa within earshot of the temporary bedroom. One night, about a week into this arrangement, I woke to the sound of muffled crying. Following the noise, I found my mother sitting at the kitchen table in darkness, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Mom," I said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Are you okay?" She hastily wiped her eyes. "I'm fine, just getting some water." I should have accepted the obvious fiction and returned to the sofa. That would have been the easy path, maintaining the careful distance we'd established. Instead, I sat down across from her. "This is really hard, isn't it?" I said simply. She didn't respond immediately, her instinct to deny vulnerability clearly warring with the reality of the situation. Finally, she nodded almost imperceptibly. "I've never seen him so weak." "I know. It's scary. What if he doesn't recover fully?" The question emerged as barely a whisper. "He's doing well," I assured her, following all the recommendations, responding to the medication. There's every reason to expect a good recovery. She twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit I remembered from childhood. "I'm not used to needing help." The admission, small as it was, represented a significant concession from a woman who had built her identity around competence and control. I recognized the opening for what it was, not an apology or even an acknowledgement of past wrongs, but a tiny crack in the wall between us. "Everyone needs help sometimes," I offered. "It doesn't make you weak, just human." We sat in silence for several minutes after that, not exactly comfortable, but not actively hostile either. Finally, she stood and announced she was going back to bed. But at the doorway, she paused. "Thank you," she said, not turning to look at me, "for coming. It wasn't much, but it was something. A beginning, perhaps." The weekend brought my first brief respite when James and Lily visited. My mother's reaction to meeting her granddaughter for the first time was complicated. A mixture of automatic delight at the beautiful chattering toddler and stiff resentment at having missed the first year of her life. "She looks like you did at that age," she observed as Lily explored the living room under James's watchful eye. "Dad said the same thing," I replied, seizing the neutral topic. "She has James's curls, though." My father was more demonstrative, his face lighting up when Lily was brought in to see him. "Well, hello there, young lady." He greeted her, extending a hand, which she promptly high-fived, a trick James had taught her. "That's your grandpa," I told Lily, who regarded him with solemn curiosity, before breaking into a dimpled smile. "Gampa," she repeated immediately, winning his heart completely. Watching them interact, I felt a complex mixture of joy and regret. Joy at the connection being formed. Regret at the time, lost to pride and stubbornness on both sides. My mother remained more reserved, but I caught her watching Lily with undisguised longing when she thought no one was looking. The visit was brief by necessity. My father tired easily, and Lily's toddler energy was too much for the quiet recovery environment, but it served as a powerful reminder of what had been lost in the years of estrangement, and perhaps what could still be rebuilt. As the second week of my stay began, subtle shifts in the household dynamic became apparent. My mother stopped questioning my care techniques quite so frequently. I found myself included in decisions about meals and schedules. We developed a wordless choreography around my father's needs, anticipating requirements and responding without discussion. The most significant moment came when I received an urgent call about a commission that needed approval before proceeding. Unable to view the images properly on my phone, I hesitantly asked my mother if I could use the desktop computer in what had once been my father's home office. "Of course," she said, seeming surprised I had asked. "It's just gathering dust these days. Your father hardly uses it anymore." The office was largely unchanged from my childhood. The same heavy wooden desk, the same landscape paintings my mother had selected to match the decor. As I waited for the computer to boot up, I noticed a silver-framed photograph I didn't remember partially hidden behind a stack of files. It was a picture of me at my college graduation, smiling between my parents. I'd forgotten my father had taken several photos that day before the argument about my future plans had erupted over dinner. Seeing it there, discreetly displayed but definitely present, suggested that perhaps I hadn't been as completely erased from family memory as I'd believed. When my mother entered with a cup of tea, placing it wordlessly beside me before leaving, I wondered if perhaps we were both learning what walking away really meant, and what finding a way back might require. 1 year after my father's heart attack, our family gathered in my parents' backyard for Lily's second birthday. The scene would have been unimaginable to me 5 years earlier. My father chasing a giggling Lily across the lawn, my mother arranging perfectly cut fruit on a platter shaped like a butterfly, James, deep in conversation with Tyler about an architectural project at Tyler's hospital. The journey to this moment hadn't been smooth or simple. There had been setbacks, difficult conversations, moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. But there had also been genuine progress, small steps toward a new kind of relationship built on mutual respect rather than control and compliance. My father had recovered, fully exceeding his doctor's expectations. He'd taken early retirement from his surgical practice, focusing instead on teaching part-time at the medical school, and to everyone's surprise, taking up woodworking as a hobby. The change had softened him, made him more present and engaged than I ever remembered him being during my childhood. "I'm making Lily a dollhouse for Christmas," he confided, as we watched her playing with the wooden blocks he'd crafted for her birthday. "Don't tell your mother. She thinks I'm building a bookcase for the living room." My mother's evolution had been more subtle but no less significant. The imperious woman who once dictated every aspect of my life had been humbled by circumstances beyond her control. Her husband's illness, her daughter's independence, her own aging. She hadn't become a different person overnight, but she had learned, sometimes painfully, to adapt to a world she couldn't command. Our relationship remained complicated. There were topics we carefully avoided, wounds still too tender to touch, but we had found a way to be family again on terms that allowed me to maintain my boundaries while still offering connection. "I put together a photo album for Lily," my mother mentioned casually as we prepared the birthday cake. "Pictures of you when you were her age. I thought she might like to see them someday." The gesture touched me deeply. Not just the photos themselves, but the implicit acknowledgement of continuity, of my mother seeing herself in me and now in my daughter, accepting rather than trying to reshape that legacy. "She'd love that," I said. "Thank you." As we sang happy birthday and helped Lily blow out her candles, I caught my mother watching me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Later, as we cleaned up while the others played a game of croquet on the lawn, she finally spoke what seemed to be on her mind. "I've been thinking about taking an art class," she said, carefully casual. "The community center has a beginner's watercolor course starting next month." The significance of this wasn't lost on me. Art had been our first and most fundamental battlefield. My passion that she had dismissed as impractical and worthless. "I think you might enjoy it," I replied, equally careful. "Watercolor is challenging but rewarding." She nodded, arranging leftover cake containers with unnecessary precision. "I thought perhaps, if you had time, you might give me some pointers beforehand, so I don't go in completely ignorant." It was an olive branch, awkwardly extended but sincere. "I'd be happy to," I said. "Maybe next weekend after Lily's nap." The relief in her smile told me everything I needed to know about how difficult that request had been for her. Later that evening, as we drove home with a sleeping Lily in the back seat, James glanced at me with a knowing expression. "So, watercolor lessons with your mom?" "Apparently." I laughed softly. Never saw that coming. "You know what this means, right? She's finally acknowledging your expertise, your career choice." "That's huge," I nodded, considering the implications. It only took a heart attack, 4 years of estrangement, and a granddaughter she couldn't bear to lose access to. "Hey, whatever works," James said lightly, but then grew more serious. "You know, when you replied 'got it' to that text, you changed everything. It was the first time you didn't play by her rules." "I was just too tired to fight anymore," I admitted. Too tired of trying to earn love that should have been unconditional. And look what happened. She had to face the consequences of her ultimatum. Had to live in a world where you weren't constantly trying to please her. Had to see what being done really meant. Not just for you, but for her. He was right. My simple two-word response had disrupted a lifetime pattern of emotional manipulation. Not out of malice or revenge, but from a place of self-preservation, and finally recognizing my own worth. In refusing to beg for a place in my mother's life, I had inadvertently created the only circumstance in which our relationship could potentially heal, one where I was strong enough to set boundaries, and she was humble enough to respect them. The road ahead wasn't perfectly clear. My mother would likely never be the warm, emotionally available parent I had craved as a child. Our relationship would always carry the scars of past conflicts. But something new was growing in place of what had been broken. Something with deeper roots in reality and mutual respect. As I checked on Lily one last time before bed that night, watching her sleep peacefully clutching the stuffed bunny my father had given her, I thought about the cycles we break and the ones we perpetuate. I thought about the text message that had been intended as punishment, but had instead become liberation. And I thought about how sometimes walking away isn't about ending relationships, but about creating the necessary space for them to begin again on healthier terms. My mother had texted, "Don't call or come over, we're done," expecting me to crumble to beg to surrender my autonomy in exchange for her approval. My reply of "got it" had shown her that I valued myself enough to accept her terms rather than compromise my integrity. And years later, when crisis brought us reluctantly back together, we both discovered what walking away really meant. Not an end, but a painful necessary step toward a different kind of beginning. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you love to protect yourself, only to find a new kind of relationship later? How did you navigate setting boundaries while still leaving room for healing? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more stories about family dynamics and personal growth. Like and share this video with someone who might need to know that sometimes the bravest response to "we're done" is simply "got it." Thank you for listening, and remember that walking away doesn't always mean forever. Sometimes it's the only way to find a path back to each other on healthier terms.